Temples, power, and the last barrier. Why moral authority remains untouchable. When we think of power today, we imagine presidents, parliament, and armies. But in the ancient world, power didn't reside in palaces. It lived in temples. The priest was the judge, the god, the lawgiver, and the temple the ministry. And although kings conquered lands and rewrote laws, there was one form of power they never managed to usurp: moral authority. Even today, from Babylon to Byzantium, from Rome to modern republics, no ruler has ever truly taken it from the church. Political power ends where the church begins. It is a boundary no king, no emperor, no president has ever crossed. Part 1. Temples as ministries. Why power began not in palaces but in shrines. When we hear the word power, we imagine presidents, ministers, parliaments, and armies. We look at a government and see a cabinet. But in the ancient world, it was different. Power didn't live in the palace, it lived in the temple. At the very heart of an ancient city stood not a government building, but a sanctuary. It rose above the squares, markets, and houses. The temple was the brain of the state. The temple as the ministry of justice. Babylon, 3rd millennium BCE. In the Isigala temple, people didn't just worship the god Marduk. Legal rulings were stored there, along with debt registers, rental contracts, and court decisions. The temple archive was the court, the priest the judge, that decided who had violated order and what punishment should follow. The temple as the ministry of health. In Greece, the temples of Asclepius functioned as healing centers. Priests performed rituals, prescribed treatments, and recorded symptoms. The temple at Epidaurus was not only a shrine, it was a hospital with a medical archive. Priests were the first physicians, temples the prototypes of hospitals. The temple is the ministry of foreign affairs. The priests of the Delphic oracle in Greece did more than predict fate. They shaped the political behavior of rulers, approving or forbidding war. The Delphic temple received ambassadors, accepted royal gifts, and served as a diplomatic and informational hub of the ancient world. Temples in Armenia, ministries of a forgotten kingdom. But this wasn't just true for Egypt, Babylon, or Greece. In ancient Armenia, temples also governed society. Take the temple of Anahit in Eriza, one of the most sacred places in pagan Armenia. This was not just a shrine to a goddess, it was a national treasury, a diplomatic center, and a symbol of royal power. Greek historians like Strabo wrote that kings sent offerings there. The temple had immense wealth, managed by priestesses and high-ranking clergy, making it one of the most powerful institutions in the kingdom. And then there is the temple of Garni, still standing today. Its columns rose not just in honor of the sun god Himhar, it stood at the center of a royal complex housing priests, scribes, astronomers, and rulers. It was the brain of the state, spiritual and political, scientific and sacred. In Armenia, as in all ancient civilizations, the temple wasn't beside power. It was power. Roman temples. In ancient Rome, temples were not just for prayer. They were state banks, legal archives, and centers of government. The temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill wasn't just sacred ground, it was where consuls swore oaths, generals offered spoils of war, and senators debated matters of state. Many temples in Rome housed the state treasury, aerarium, and some even served as archives for laws and treaties. To enter a temple was often to enter the heart of Roman administration. In Rome, as in Armenia and elsewhere, the divine and the political were inseparable, until the moment Christianity redrew the boundary. The key idea. In antiquity, the priest was not just a mediator between people and gods. He was a judge, financier, diplomat, physician, and political actor. The temple was at once a ministry, an archive, a treasury, and a tribunal. Transition from temples to thrones. Power did not belong to the king. It belonged to the temple. And if a king sought power, he had to enter the temple, not as a mere mortal, but as a priest. That is why many ancient rulers became gods. The pharaoh a god, the emperor the son of heaven, the king the viceroy of the gods. Thus paganism blurred the line between spiritual and secular power. But then came a rupture, a civilizational shift. With the rise of monotheism, the temple was no longer a ministry. It became something else entirely, a sanctuary not of administration but of truth. And while kings still ruled, the priest no longer served the state. He served a moral order, higher than law, greater than empire. From that moment on, no ruler could fully control it. Part 2. Why rulers can never usurp moral authority. When empires took over governance from the temple, they seized almost everything: taxation, justice, medicine, and diplomatic channels. But there was one thing they could never bring under control: moral authority. Moral authority is not a command, it is the limit of command. It's what tells a king, you do not have the right to everything. It's what can judge even the one who judges others. Paganism, where the ruler equals God. In ancient Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, and Rome, the ruler was often declared semi-divine. The pharaoh was the son of Ra, the emperor a living god. Law was the will of the sovereign. That meant any crime could be justified. Law aligned with royal will. Morality was subordinate to the interests of power. The temple, once an independent ministry, no longer resisted. It became a loyal part of the system. Christianity, the separation of power and holiness. But Christianity introduced a radical shift. For the first time in history, holiness and political power were separated. A king could no longer be a god. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Gospel of Matthew 22:21. This phrase drew a boundary between the state and moral law. The Caesar is not the source of good and evil. He himself stands under divine judgment. He cannot create morality, he can only submit to it. Why is moral authority higher than secular power? Because it rests on something beyond man, on God, on sacred scripture, on conscience, on tradition, on natural law. That's why the Christian church could rebuke emperors, rather than serve as their mouthpiece. The church reminded them, you are not God, you are not the master of truth, you are mortal. Usurpation is impossible, but attempts were made. Nearly every emperor dreamed of tearing down that barrier. Emperor Julian tried to revive paganism where the ruler is also priest. French revolutionaries replaced God with reason. The Soviet regime replaced the church with ideology and installed scientific morality. Totalitarian regimes of the 20th century deified leaders. But in every case, this was not a conquest of morality, but its destruction and replacement. Why does this matter today? As long as there exists a source of morality outside the state, people retain the right to say no to power. That is the essence of freedom. The church reminds us, a human being is not subject to a king, but to truth, conscience, and God. Conclusion. Rulers can control armies, borders, and money, but when they start rewriting morality for their own benefit, the world becomes tyranny, because then there is no one left to say this is evil. Only power remains. That's why moral authority must remain independent. It is the last safeguard of our humanity, and that is the essence of civilization. Power must fear the truth, not silence it. Otherwise, tyranny begins. Civilization will be destroyed. The Church as the only independent institution. Throughout history, rulers have tried to subordinate the Church. They attempted to appoint bishops to control the pulpits, create state religions to replace faith with loyalty, eliminate the clergy when it resisted. But one thing always stood in their way. The Church is not a tool. It is the conscience of society. It speaks what power finds inconvenient. It judges when others remain silent. And that is precisely why no ruler has ever fully usurped it. What is moral authority? It is the ability to name good and evil, regardless of the interests of the powerful. It is the right to say, you are wealthy but unjust, you are strong but sinful, you are king but not God. Power fears such truth. That is why every regime, from pharaohs to totalitarian states, has tried to destroy or subjugate the conscience. But the moment morality is subordinated, it ceases to be morality.